beyond right
and wrong.
there's a field. Meet us there.
What do you do when you get into conflict with the people closest to you? Whether it's a business partner or your family or any type of group you're a part of, what do you do?
What do we want to do, or what do we do?
Other than making them wrong, you mean?
Yeah, how about we explore what we could be doing that would be helpful?
Oh, that sounds good.
Yeah.
You might want to tell why we have this topic, actually.
So we hit a conflict about the topic that we're going to discuss today. This was the inspiration for this topic.
I think the first thing to do is recognize that there is a conflict and where you are and what comes up here in this space instead of worrying about what's coming up in the other space first.
And not avoid it. You know how we can oblivionize the conflict? It's fine. It's fine. Right? Right. Don't avoid it. It's not that's not a good solution.
Yeah.
And stay with it. I mean, remember that we are together for a reason, you know? And slow things down. I think it's a good idea. Slow things down. Even though sometimes, I mean, that was the issue, I think, for all of us. We were hitting a time constraint. But so it seems like slowing things down is like counterintuitive, but it actually was like we had to slow things down and really understand what each person was feeling and what we wanted. And then we could find what we agreed on.
Yeah.
What do we agree on here?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And also finding the piece of like what's important to all of us. Not what do we like, how do we see it happening, and what's the exact thing that we want, but like in that, what is the result or the intended thing or what's important. And so I feel like when we were all able to just feel what's important, we could come up with something that included all of that was good for everyone.
I think that's easy sometimes when you're with people that you like or that you love or that you have a common purpose with. But it can be much harder when there's a stranger involved or someone you don't know that well or a friend of a friend or
Political candidate.
very much
No,
so.
or
Opponent.
someone opponent,
Yeah.
political opponent.
Something you see as an opponent. And so I think it's really important in those instances to like really be vulnerable enough to find out, like really understand what their view is. Not just to change it, but just to really understand it.
Go ahead.
Well, I think another piece is also, I know for me personally, sometimes I get into a slight conflict that's not really a conflict yet. It's just like a mismatch of visions or perspectives. And then there's like either I react or they react. Or let's say they react. And then I'm like, oh, no. And then whatever they say, I'm like basically going to oppose just because of that reaction, and I want to prove them wrong. So I think in those moments really is like practicing patience or taking a step back or like relaxing or like doing something, you know, whether it's some of the exercises that I like to use where I, you know, count forms or things like that, or out of the situation, because then it's so much easier. And then I realized like, oh, they didn't really want anything much further off than what I wanted anyways.
So what you're saying is like awareness. You're basically stepping out of the boiling pot, looking at the boiling pot rather than being in it, and shifting yourself, your perspective and your viewpoint so that you can take a look at it.
Well, I was just thinking one thing too is just to be okay with conflict.
Yeah.
I mean, I think we're trained to think that that's such a bad thing and to avoid it and shouldn't have it and all that.
Or we can't be together anymore, or we, you know,
Right.
kind of like abort the whole.
It's a sign.
Yeah, it's a sign.
But you know, any good movie or any good story has a good conflict in it. Well, there's not much story.
I feel sometimes a conflict rises because of differences in opinion on how to get to a certain goal. Like we get so convinced, so certain that if I do this, it will take me there, and someone says, especially in business, no, if we do this, this is what's going to take us there. It's so nice to back up a little bit and really feel what is the bigger picture. What is the intention that you're trying to move forward? Because out of that, you might find a solution, a third or fourth or fifth solution that is even better.
Yeah, all encompassing.
Exactly, and that's where that, you know, the conflict was actually a blessing in helping the team reach there even quicker, more efficiently.
Yeah, I love that because I think that sometimes when we get into a conflict, we start to think like the other person doesn't want something good or they have a bad intention. But I think, I mean, there's always exceptions, but it's pretty safe to say that like we're all working to create better circumstances in
Yes.
general for ourselves. And
Yes.
I'm sure that if we could help the other person see that, you know, doing something could create better circumstances for more than just themselves, I think we would all be on board if we could just take that moment.
I also think if we could take that moment to see their solution to getting to that same place, that's for me the tricky part. Like really seeing their solution as a solution doesn't mean I have to take it, but if I'm not able to see their viewpoint as legit,
It locks you out of the possibility or
of anything
anything you
else,
could
of
learn
anything
from it.
new.
Well, you can't. So whenever we have a conflict, for some reason, it triggers our reptilian brain. You know, like I don't know. Yeah, like we go into instincts.
Yeah.
Right, and it becomes to the brain physically. We experience it as something big. So whatever we can do in that moment, where we don't activate the fight or flight, instead we increase our, I'm gonna call it mindfulness, but different practices call it different things. You know, our, you know, in Avatar we call it being deliberate. Whatever it is that makes you more present in that time, and you know your brain is not interpreting things a certain way. You really, because we like to blame our brain, but it's us, right? So whatever it is in that moment, any practice that makes us be more present, that makes us show up more the full being that we are, do it. Do it as that experience is unfolding.
Yeah, you can't wait for the other guy.
No.
I think that's the key, I think, to this. You really can't wait for the other guy. It really has to come from you, and it might take a stretch. I know it does for me. It might be uncomfortable. It might be something that I'm doing kicking and screaming inside. but then I take that breath, or I count those forms, and then I'm like more relaxed and present and
My go-to is minding the edges.
minding the
Yeah,
edges.
where you engage in a conversation and mind the edges of what you see.
I love that exercise.
I have a friend that's a school principal and uses it when she has parents screaming and yelling and mad, and she just minds it, and they wind down,
Wow.
minding the edges.
Yeah.
So that would be a good exercise that maybe we can put
we
a
could do
link.
that.
I think that's
It's a good idea. In the link below.
Right after you subscribe.
Right.
I think if we can all just stretch through our limits, however far in our ability to like work through conflict instead of running from it, I think it'll help this world be better.
I do
Yes.
too.
And I'm also just feeling, just look at it as this is our,
It's our chance to practice patience.
yeah,
Yeah.
this is our path.
This is
You
our
know,
path.
The everyday living and practicing what we know. This is our growth.
Yeah, you're right. And you're honoring yourself, honoring your path when you do handle it, something that's even challenging like that.
I'm grateful to be friends with you all.
Yeah, I'm grateful we can work through things. So we can keep creating together.
Awesome.
And we'd love to hear from you if you want to leave some comments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Ciao.
Aww.
It's good.